As it's an honor for me, first of all, of course, to introduce our keynote speaker, who is now with us, His Excellency Dr. Craig Emerson. He is actually an economist based on what I see from his background, and he's been in policy areas for a long time. He was actually a policy advisor to former Prime Minister Bapoki, and now he is the Minister of Trade of Australia. So I don't want to take too much time, and we welcome His Excellency. Please.
Well, thank you very much. Turn these up a little. Thank you very much. It's great to be here in Bali. I think I've been to most places around the world about 5 times, and I've never been to Bali. So it's a really great opportunity, and I'm sure I'll have a bit of a look around before we jump back on a plane and go back to Australia for our Parliament. It's our last parliamentary week next week. I wanted to share with you some thoughts on trade and the state of the world economy insofar as they affect the ASEAN region and Australia. ASEAN was one of the great innovations of the second half of the 20th century, and it really did set the scene for other creations that similarly have done good work, such as, for example, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum, where we were just last week. That forum produced some important outcomes, which I'll mention briefly to you in my presentation. But from an Australian perspective, we recognised back in the very early 1980s that as a country we could not hope to prosper and grow by maintaining a Fortress Australia approach to economic policy. At that time, back in the early 1980s, Treasury officials would get out of bed every morning, go into an office, have some cereal and some orange juice and set the exchange rate for the day. It's not that long ago. We had very, very high trade barriers as we sought to insulate the Australian economy from competition. And the result of that was that our manufacturing sector had almost disappeared. It was on its knees. We were uncompetitive in the world, and our businesses and our employee organisations, our trade unions, asked for ever increasing trade barriers to protect them from competition. The incoming Hawke government, which I was able to advise, recognised that this was not a recipe for the future economic development of our country, and so a process of dismantling trade barriers was implemented. Our financial markets were opened up, and Treasury officials didn't have to go into that same office every morning with their orange juice and their cereal and set the exchange rate, because we allowed it to float. We recognised at that time that Australia's future therefore lay in the Asian region, in the Asian century. And now when people look at our country, Australia, they say it's the lucky country. And I'd suggest that that is true, but our positioning in the Australian region in the Asian century was not a matter of good luck. It was actually very difficult and very controversial. But we understood that this, the 21st century, would be the Asian century. And so in addition to opening up our economy to competition, we reached out to the leadership of countries of the region and sought a common understanding that this way lay the future. And I think ASEAN has proved itself to be a very effective vehicle for ensuring that we go down a path of increasing trade and with it increasing prosperity. I could stand before you today and rattle off a whole lot of statistics, but I think it's more important to tell the story of ASEAN's success. And there's no doubt if we look back 25 years ago and look now to what's happening in the ASEAN countries, we see a very good, positive story. We see millions of people who have been liberated from poverty, which means that it's never been truer that trade is not just about relationships between large companies, as important as those are, but it's very much about everyday people, people who otherwise may not have such a big voice. But if they can get jobs as a result of the trade liberalisation, they may not know that it was because of the formation of ASEAN. They may not know that it was a result of trade agreements and trade liberalisation, but nevertheless, now they have an opportunity to gain paid work and to support their families. We're living now again in challenging times, and I think people are tuning in on a daily, if not an hourly basis to what is happening in Europe. And it does tell us that we have gone down the right path, in the path that we have chosen, because this has been the pathway to prosperity, and you would not want to be in any other place on earth than in this, the Asian region, in the Asian century. We now need to, in my view, look for new ways to integrate the economies of ASEAN, Australia, New Zealand, and the wider Asia-Pacific region, so that we lock in the gains that we've already made and then we build on those gains through increasing specialisation that goes with trade. We've been very concerned about Europe because it doesn't seem to have adopted a similar philosophy, and it has its own very substantial financial problems. And if I could put to you that if those problems are not to disappear overnight, and as much as we would like that they do so, then we have to assume that our future remains very much focused on our decisions here in this region. We have tried through various forums to continue the economic integration about which I speak. We've actually sought it through the World Trade Organization in Geneva, and while I won't dwell on that, I think everyone here would accept that those negotiations are at an impasse. Australia has long believed in the value of global trade liberalisation, and we will continue to press our new pathway to find ways of breaking that impasse. But here in our region as well, through APEC last week, you saw very strong commitments to ongoing liberalisation, by which I mean not simply further reducing tariffs between our countries, but ensuring that those impediments that are most insidious to business, the behind the borders restrictions, are eased or removed. And if I could say here that it's not always a case of malevolent governments putting in place behind the border restrictions. Perhaps they don't even intend to do so. Perhaps they don't think deeply about it, but they're there. They're there in all countries. And so the 21st century task is obviously to continue where we can the tariff reduction task, but to ensure that we remove those behind the border restrictions. And if you look at, in a sense, the 21st century manifestation of trade, increasingly it's about investment in each other's countries. It's about supply chains where not one company in one country produces everything from the raw material to the final good. That has never been the case, but it has never been so clearly the case now in the 21st century, where we see businesses producing inputs towards a final good or a service located in different countries, and then trading in those inputs to produce the final good or service. And that's what we really need to focus on, and I think it's worth us spending some time in our panel discussion on that. Because if we can liberalise investment, then we do exactly what we've done with trade over the last quarter century. We unleash the capacity for more people, everyday people in all our countries, to share in the benefits of trade and investment. And that's what I think is probably the key to our future, to make sure that not only have we liberalised trade in goods, liberalised trade in services, but liberalised investments. So I'm hoping and suggesting, perhaps with the nodding concurrence of our convener, that this is a direction that we may take in our panel discussions. Thank you very much.